In this portion of the video, we're going to talk three common causes that cause a P0741 and a P0771 on the FNR5 transmission. P0741 is excessive converter clutch slip, and P0771 is SSC solenoid performance code. Now, the first thing we're going to put our attention to is to the valve bodies, one of the common causes. What you want to look into here, what causes this, is the torque converter clutch control valve. Excessive wear here or in its bore can cause torque converter clutch feed oil that's supposed to go to the rear of the torque converter, come over to the front of the torque converter clutch, and it causing the torque converter slip. The other portion that can cause this code is also the torque converter pump, specifically the stator bushings, these two stator bushings. Excessive wear in these bushings can cause the same thing as an excessive wear on the torque converter clutch control valve or its bore, because it allows the fluid that's supposed to be in the rear of the torque converter clutch to enter also into the front of the torque converter clutch. Always replace these bushings with OE new bushings or aftermarket, but make sure you always replace them. The other thing that can cause this is the torque converter itself. But before we go to that, let us show you how the torque converter clutch is engaged on this transmission. Let's focus our attention on this diagram. When the torque converter clutch control valve is bottom out in its bore by the spring, this allows the torque converter cooler feed that comes from the pressure regulator valve to enter through the front of the torque converter clutch and also feed the rear, and it blocks here. With oil being in the front of the torque converter clutch and in the rear of the torque converter clutch, the TCC is not engaged. To engage the torque converter clutch, all the computer has to do is turn on SSC. SSC then strokes the torque converter clutch control valve, and the fluid now enters through the rear of the torque converter clutch, thus applying the torque converter. At times, however, the computer may decide that it wants to modulate the torque converter clutch to come on smoothly. When it does, what happens is it modulates the SSA solenoid. This allows SSA fluid from the solenoid to enter the front portion of the torque converter, not allowing it to engage. Then the computer starts to modulate the SSA to 100% slowly, and thus dumping the oil from the front of the torque converter clutch and smoothly applying the torque converter clutch. The next problem we'll see now has to do with the torque converter. Now let's look at the effects of that leak on the torque converter. When the torque converter clutch feed oil that is not supposed to be in the front cover of the torque converter is entered through a leak, either through the bore or through the bushings, what happens is the fluid it gets here, it will not allow the torque converter to a clutch to engage. Now, what can happen with the torque converter is that the turbine shaft seal can leak, allowing the rear fluid to enter the front of the cover, or the sealing ring that's between the dampener and the torque converter clutch. Now, these two things unfortunately are inside the converter, so we cannot see them. But we're going to show you a test you can do in the bench that can test to see if you have a leak inside the torque converter clutch itself. So let's look at how we can test this. Okay, so now let's show you how we could bench test the torque converter to check for a possible P0741. Now what we're going to do is we're going to apply air on the rear side of the converter. This is the front side of the converter. This is your forward drum. This is also your transmission cooler. So what we're going to do is we're going to block the transmission cooler. We're going to go ahead and block the front section of the converter. We're going to apply air while we turn the drum. And as you can see, when you apply air, it stops. You can't turn it anymore. If I release it, Síguele. See how it turns? I want to put air. Okay, it won't turn anymore. This is how it's supposed to be. It's a properly working converter. Now let's show you a converter that has a P0741. We replaced the valve body, they replaced the pump, and then we'll discuss other issues that could be a problem. Okay, now this is a converter that had a P0741, and two valve bodies were replaced, and pump bushings were replaced, and the only thing that cured this was replacing the converter. So now let's say you could test it. I'm going to go ahead and plug the radiator cooler, the rear section, the front section, and now we're going to do the. And no matter how much air I put in there, as you can see, it will not stop turning. Let's do it again. Put more air. It will not stop turning. Okay. Now, one of the things that could cause also the problem, as you know, is this bushings right here can wear out. It can also cause you a P0741. But this is a brand new pump, brand new bushings, and that's one of the ways you could bench test the converters to check and see if you have a possible P0741. This is good also in the 4F27, FNR5, in the Ford, and also on the Mazda.